Good afternoon. So the title of this video is Noah's Ark is the Sun. And I made this, here is the zodiac. This is the zodiac calendar using the Babylonian names for the months or for the constellations. And you can see that the flood begins in the month which is called Ajaru. And Ajaru is the second month. And the flood says in Genesis 7 that the flood begins in the second month on the 17th day of the month, which is right after the full moon. And now if you look at this next line here, it says Simanu. That's the month of Gemini, or the constellation Gemini, which is the month of, let's see, we'd have March, April, May. So Gemini is the third month, and it's called Simanu. Now, if you see the word Simon in there, that's Simon. Simon, we know that name from the Bible, Simon Peter. So that's where you get the name Simon. I just found that out too as I was going through this. But we're talking about Noah's Ark here, so we're in the Old Testament, Genesis. And below that, we have Deuzu. And Deuzu is where you get the word Tammuz, and that's the month of June. It's where you get the word Tammuz, which is where you get the name Thomas. So we've got the flood begins in the month called Ajaru in the Babylonian tongue, and then it goes through Simanu and it goes into Deuzu, and Deuzu is the month of June. And this is where the boat rises. So this is where it lifts up off of the ground and begins to move about above the mountains. Now that's after 40 days. So if you look on this little chart here, this little zodiac chart, you'll see that the flood begins at Ajaru, in mid-Ajaru, the 17th day, and goes for 40 days. So it goes through the month of May and into the beginning, is it the beginning of June or somewhere in June? Okay. Anyway, it's in June. I can't get too specific because I don't have all the exact specific details. I'm just giving you the general. Okay, so then the flood continues. The flood continues through, so June, July, August to September. So that is Leo and what's Ululu? Leo and Leo and that's the Virgin. What do you call that? Virgo. Ululu is the name for Virgo in the old calendar. Okay, so let's look at this again. So it starts here with Nisanu. Well, it doesn't start in Nisanu. The flood starts in Ajaru, and then it floods for 40 days until you're into Deuzu. Now Deuzu, the month of also known as Tammuz, also known as Thomas, is the month of the summer solstice. So now you're in the summer. You're in midsummer at Deuzu, okay? And so the flood continues, because it floods for 150 days, not 40 days. 40 days is what it takes to get into June. Okay? It takes 40 days to get into June. Now you're in June. This is the month of the summer solstice. So from the second month, it rains for 40 days, and it floods for 40 days, and so the ship rises up into the summer solstice, and now it begins to move across, right? The ship is now floating around up above the mountains. Now, so that continues on into the month which you see at the bottom, which is called Tasritu in the old calendar, and that's where the flood stops. That's where the rain stops. That's where the water stops flowing into the earth. It stops falling down from the sky. It stops coming up from the wells below the earth. So this is the point in Tasritu, which is the 7th month after 150 days of flooding. The flood ends. Okay? It just ends. That's what happens at Tasritu. And so this is the point where, in the story of Noah's Ark, this is where the ark strikes the top of Mount Ararat. And all the flooding stops. So then you can see on this other side here, oh, I'm sorry. Let's look at this side. So now that once the flooding has stopped, then we get into the waters decreasing. And the waters decrease from the 7th month, September, which they call Tasritu, into December, which we call December, the 10th month, which they call Tebetu. And so the waters have been decreasing through September, October, November, December. So in December is the winter solstice month. This is where the waters, now this is where the waters have been decreasing for 3 months, and now the tops of the mountains are visible. That's what it says in the story of Genesis. The tops of the mountains are visible. Now, then you go another 40 days after that before Noah opens the window. Now, what's that 40-day period? That's called Sabbatu. That's the Sabbath month of January. That month is called Sabbatu. So for 40 days after December, you go through Sabbatu, and Noah just sits in the ark. He just sits in there. And then after once you get through Sabbatu and you get into Adaru, which would be February, and it's the sign, the constellation of Pisces. This is where you have Noah release the 2 birds. And 7 days, so after 40 days, he opens the window and lets a bird out. And then 7 days later, he lets another bird out. And then the bird doesn't come back. And I don't know, it was another 7 days and the land's dry. And then on the first month of the following year, they leave the ark, which would be Nisanu. That is the story of Noah's Ark. It's the story of the sun going through its cycle. It starts with it starts in Ajaru, so it starts in the 2nd month. So we can kind of presume, like in the 1st month, Noah is told to build the ark, right? And then in the 2nd month, 10 days into the 2nd month, God tells Noah to go into the ark. And then 17 days into the 2nd month, it begins to rain and flood. And then it floods for 40 days. And so the 40-day period gets you through Ajaru, through Simanu, and into Deuzu. And that's the month of the summer solstice. And that's the month where the boat has risen up above the mountaintops. So there you go. And then it continues to flood till you get to Tasritu, and the flooding stops. And the ark strikes the tip of Mount Ararat. And then from Tasritu to Tebetu, another 3 months, and the land dries out. The tops of the mountains are seen. And then from Tebetu, which is December, through Sabbatu, which is January, and then Adaru, which is February, we have Noah sitting in his ark, because it's the Sabbath. It's the month of the Sabbath. The Sabbath month is January, so he just sits in there. And then a week into February, or what they call Adaru, about a week into that, he releases a bird, and then the birds come back, and then he releases them again, and then the bird comes back with the olive branch, and then they don't come back, and then in the beginning of Nisanu, the March, that's the 1st month, they exit the ark. So that's the story of Noah's Ark. And so, but the story of Christ is a little bit different, because now what are we doing? Now the Passover is actually the 1st month. So right now it's April 9th, but it's actually the first full lunar cycle from new moon to full moon started on March 21st, 22nd, around that time, right? So it's always a little different. It's always a little bit before the spring equinox or a little bit after the spring equinox. But somewhere in there, you'll have the beginning of the first month. It'll be somewhere around the time of the spring equinox. So basically what you need is a spring equinox and a new moon. That's what starts the month. And so if the new moon could be a little bit before the spring equinox or a little bit after the spring equinox. In this case, the new moon was after the spring, well, it was just right at the time of the spring equinox. So this time, okay, so this year, the full moon landed like almost exactly at the same time as the spring equinox. And oddly enough, it was, the new moon. The new moon was almost exactly at the same time as the spring equinox. And back in December, during the winter solstice of last year, the new moon was right at the winter solstice too. So this is just how it's timed right now. It's coinciding with the solstice and the equinox. But it's not always doing that, but it is now. So that's why we're in April. Today is April 9th, and it's Easter Sunday. But it's still the first month of that moon period, because the moon goes from new moon to quarter moon to full moon to quarter moon, and then you get another new moon. So the next new moon won't be till somewhere in the middle of April. So I know that's a little confusing, but right now we're still in the first month. So the second month of the year will be the next moon cycle. So it's not on the Passover. As far as the flooding beginning, it does not begin on the Passover, like the Christmas. Like the Easter celebration does. It begins on the second month, and it floods for 40 days, which takes you right into June. Right into right in through June, right into June, maybe mid-June or something. I don't know exactly. You'll have to look at it. It's going to be a little bit different every year as far as how close or far away the moon cycle is to the sun, but that's how it's calculated. So with Christianity, we have Jesus being crucified over the time of the Passover, and then we have 40 days of his ascension. So he comes back every day for 40 days until he ascends up into heaven, until he disappears behind a cloud. And that's in Luke. That's the story of Luke explains that. And so that'll put us right actually in June. From now, and 40 days from now will be, I believe it's right in the beginning of June. So the timing for the Noah's Ark flood and when the ascension of the Ark is not the same as the ascension of Christ. It's off by a few days, by several days, depending on how you calculate it. So it's not identical, but it's similar. And so there's a 40-day ascension of the Ark, and then there's a 40-day ascension of Christ, but they don't happen at the same time. Christ happens on the Passover, and the Ark happens in the second month. So that's the information on Noah's Ark. Now, so that's the story of Noah's Ark and how it relates to the story of Christ, and as far as the 40-day ascension goes. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, thank you.